The air at the Sterling estate was thick with the scent of money and white roses. It clung to the damask tablecloths, settled in the flutes of champagne, and wafted from the impeccably dressed guests who moved across the manicured lawns like chess pieces in a game of silent, elegant warfare. In the center of it all was Alara, not as a guest, of course, but as a ghost with florist's apron tied neatly around her waist and hands that were far too graceful for the menial tasks she performed. She moved between opulent arrangements of hydrangeas and lilies, her fingers coaxing a rebellious petal into place, her presence as unnoticed as the soft hum of the generator hidden behind the marquee. She was a shadow in a world bleached by sunlight and privilege. The matriarch of this world, the queen of this chessboard, was Beatrice Sterling, the mother of the groom. She was a woman carved from ice and disapproval, dressed in a sheath of dove-gray silk that probably cost more than Alara's rent for a year. Beatrice didn't walk. She presided. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, swept over proceedings, cataloging every minor flaw with a microscopic precision. Her gaze snagged on Alara for a fleeting, dismissive moment. She saw not a person, but a function, a pair of hands to be directed, a problem to be avoided. Alara felt the chill of that glance even from across the lawn, and instinctively made herself smaller, tucking a stray curl back under her headscarf, her focus returning to the cascade of orchids she was perfecting on the wedding cake table. This was her world now. Petals and stems, soil and water. It was a quiet art, a safe one. It was a far cry from the world she had once been destined for, a world of polished floors, blinding spotlights, and the thunderous roar of an audience on their feet. But that was a door she had closed long ago, locking away the memories with a key of grief and duty. The ceremony had been a beautiful, sterile affair. The bride, Chloe, was lovely and timid, her smile a fragile thing under the weight of Beatrice's constant scrutiny. The groom, Liam, Beatrice's son, seemed kind but distracted, his eyes often drifting towards the distant woods, as if searching for an escape. Now, at the reception, the performance was in full swing. A string quartet played Vivaldi with a practiced, emotionless flair, and the guests laughed in carefully modulated tones. Alara was refilling a small crystal vase near the main receiving line when it happened. A portly guest, laughing too loudly at a joke, stumbled backward, bumping into her with a soft thud. It wasn't a hard impact, but it was enough. The crystal vase tipped, and a small, perfect arc of water splashed directly onto the front of Beatrice Sterling's silk gown. A collective gasp sucked the air from the tent. The Vivaldi screeched to a halt. Every eye snapped to the scene. The water created a dark, ugly stain on the pristine gray fabric, a glaring imperfection in Beatrice's masterpiece of day. For a moment, there was only a frozen silence. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "I am so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible, as she reached for a linen napkin. Beatrice looked down at the stain, not with anger, but with a slow, theatrical horror, as if she were gazing upon a mortal wound. Then she lifted her eyes, and they were no longer cold. They were burning. She didn't look at the guest who had caused the spill. She looked only at Alara. "You," she said, her voice low and sharp, cutting through the silence. "You clumsy girl." The word struck Alara like a physical blow. The portly guest began to stammer an apology. "It was my fault, Beatrice. But Beatrice waved him into silence with a flick of her wrist, never breaking eye contact with Alara. "Some people," she announced to the silent, watching crowd, her voice rising with righteous indignation, "simply do not have the grace or the awareness to exist in a refined environment. They are like weeds in a rose garden. They don't belong." The insult was so precise, so publicly delivered, that Alara felt the blood drain from her face. It wasn't just about the spilled water. It was about the headscarf she wore, the dark skin of her hands against the white flowers, her very presence in this exclusive space. A few guests snickered. Others looked down at their shoes, their discomfort a form of passive complicity. No one defended her. She was the help. An invisible girl made suddenly horribly visible. "Look at my dress," Beatrice continued, her voice dripping with venom. "Imported silk. Ruined, utterly ruined by your incompetence." She reached out and snatched a linen napkin from Alara's trembling hand. "Don't just stand there gawking. Go. Get out of my sight. You are fired." Tears pricked at the corners of Alara's eyes, hot and shameful. She wanted the ground to swallow her whole. She nodded numbly, her throat too tight to form words. She turned to leave, the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on her back, each one a tiny pinprick of humiliation. As she walked away, a murmur of sympathetic whispers for Beatrice rippled through the crowd, cementing Alara's role as the villain of the afternoon, the blemish on a perfect day. She retreated to the relative obscurity of the catering tent, her hands shaking as she untied her apron. The scent of roses now seemed sickeningly sweet, a perfume for her own degradation. She could still hear the party resuming its rhythm, the music starting up again, the laughter returning, a little louder this time, as if to erase the unpleasantness, to erase her. Inside the main tent, Liam Sterling had watched the entire exchange with a knot tightening in his stomach. He'd seen the accident, heard his mother's cruel, targeted words. He knew her. He knew that cold, dismissive cruelty was a weapon she wielded to maintain control. For years, he had been a bystander to it, placating her, smoothing things over, choosing the path of least resistance. He loved his mother, but he was suffocated by her expectations, her prejudices, her iron will. He saw the florist assistant walk away, her shoulders slumped in defeat, and something inside him, something long dormant, finally stirred. Her face. There was something hauntingly familiar about her face, about the way she held herself even in shame. Later, the formalities continued. The cake was cut, the toasts were made, and then came the first dance. Liam and Chloe swayed together on the polished dance floor, a perfect couple in a perfect picture. But Liam's eyes weren't on his new wife. They were scanning the edges of the room, searching. After their dance, the music shifted to something more traditional, and the master of ceremonies announced the mother-son dance. A smattering of applause broke out. But Beatrice was nowhere to be seen. She was, as a bridesmaid whispered to Chloe, in the estate's powder room with 2 seamstresses, trying to salvage her ruined gown, her fury still simmering. The band played the intro to the waltz. The dance floor was empty, waiting. Liam stood alone in the center, a groom abandoned at his own reception. The guests began to murmur. It was awkward. It was a crack in the perfect facade. And in that moment of public discomfort, Liam saw her again. Alara. She hadn't left. She was near the edge of the tent, quietly gathering the tools of her trade into a canvas bag, preparing to slip away into the night. Her head was down, her movements efficient and silent. She was trying to become a ghost once more. And then it hit him, a memory, sharp and vivid, from a lifetime ago. A dusty community hall, the smell of floor wax and sweat. A little girl with 2 bright ribbons in her hair, spinning with a furious, joyful energy that seemed too big for her small body. A girl who could leap higher, turn faster, and feel the music in her bones in a way he never could. A girl named Alara Vance, his first dance partner, his childhood friend, before his family had moved to the right side of the tracks and her family had been left on the wrong one. Before life had built a wall of class and circumstance between them. A decision, clear and absolute, crystallized in his mind. It wasn't about defiance. Not really. It was about correcting an injustice. It was about honoring a memory he had long since buried. The guests watched, mystified, as Liam Sterling, the groom, left the center of the dance floor and began walking with purpose toward the edge of the tent, towards a florist assistant who was trying so hard to disappear. Alara didn't notice him approaching until his polished dress, shoes came into her line of sight. She looked up, startled, her eyes wide with a flicker of fear. Was he here to scold her further? To make sure she was leaving? He stopped in front of her. The string quartet had faltered, the music trailing off into a confused silence. Once again, every eye in the room was on her. "Alara," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "Alara Vance. It is you, isn't it?" She stared at him, her mind racing. Liam? Little Liam Sterling, with the scabby knees and the 2 left feet he'd tried so hard to coordinate in Mrs. Gable's dance class all those years ago. She could only nod, her heart beginning to pound a new, uncertain rhythm. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that seemed entirely out of place on his face. "My mother is indisposed," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "But the song is playing, and I believe I owe you a dance." He extended his hand. A wave of panic washed over Alara. A dance? Here? Now? In front of all these people who had just witnessed her utter humiliation? It was insane. It was a joke. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "I can't. I'm working." "You were fired," he reminded her gently. "So you're officially off the clock." His hand remained outstretched, patient and unwavering. His eyes held hers, and in them she saw not pity, but a flicker of the boy she used to know, the boy who had always been in awe of her talent. "Please, Alara, for old time's sake." The world seemed to shrink to the space between them. The stares of the guests, the weight of the day, all of it began to fade. There was only his hand, an invitation not just to a dance, but to reclaim something she had lost. Slowly, hesitantly, she placed her work-roughened hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and firm. He led her from the shadows at the edge of the tent onto the vast, empty expanse of the dance floor. A collective, audible gasp rippled through the crowd. The bride, Chloe, watched from her table, her expression a mixture of shock and dawning curiosity. Liam turned to the band leader. "Do you know La Comparsita?" he asked. The band leader, a seasoned professional, nodded. "The tango?" he asked, his eyebrow raised. "Of course." The strings were silenced. A piano, an accordion, and a bass took over, and the first dramatic, smoldering notes of the tango filled the tent. The music was a challenge. It was a declaration. It was everything a waltz was not. Liam pulled Alara into position. Her body was stiff with fear and self-consciousness. She remembered the steps, of course. Her body remembered them better than her mind did, but her spirit had forgotten how to fly. "Just follow my lead," Liam whispered, but they both knew that had never been a way it worked between them. She had always been the leader, the fire. He had been the frame, the support. They took the first few steps, formal and a little clumsy. The guests murmured, some with amusement, some with pity. This was a spectacle, a bizarre act of charity from the groom. Then, just as Alara was about to falter, to pull away and run, Liam looked into her eyes. "I remember you, Alara," he said, his voice for her alone. "I remember the recital. The solo you did. You were brilliant. You were free. Don't let her take that from you." His words were the key. They unlocked the door she had sealed shut for a decade. The memory flooded back. The heat of the lights, the scent of rosin on her point shoes, the intoxicating power of holding an entire audience captive with nothing but movement and music. The grief, the duty, the years of making herself small to survive, all of it fell away. The shame Beatrice had heaped upon her began to burn, not as a poison, but as fuel. The timid florist vanished, and in her place, a dancer emerged. Her posture changed. Her spine straightened. Her chin lifted. She met Liam's gaze, and for the first time that day, her eyes shone with something other than fear. She took control. Her steps became sharp, precise. Her hand on his shoulder was no longer hesitant but firm, guiding him. The tango is a conversation, a battle of wills, a story of passion and control. And Alara began to tell her story. Her feet flew across the floor, a blur of intricate, percussive steps. She spun, and the simple skirt of her uniform flared around her like a professional dancer's costume. She dipped and arched her back, a movement of such exquisite grace and power that the crowd fell utterly silent. This was not the clumsy girl who had spilled a vase of water. This was an artist, a master of her craft unleashed. Liam, to his credit, was a solid partner. He was a sturdy oak to her wild, beautiful vine. He gave her the space, the support, the foundation she needed to soar. He was a frame, and she was the inferno raging within it. Every ounce of her frustration, every moment of humiliation, every silent indignity she had ever suffered was poured into that dance. The sharp turn of her head was a dismissal of their judgment. The powerful stomp of her heel was a defiance of their scorn. The fluid, sensual grace of her movements was a celebration of the beauty they had refused to see. She was no longer a weed in a rose garden. She was a rose, wild, thorny, and magnificent. Just then, Beatrice Sterling returned. Her dress was mostly dry, her composure restored. She swept back into the tent, ready to reclaim her position at the center of the universe. And she stopped dead. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth. On the dance floor, her son was entwined with the fire help. But they weren't just dancing. They were performing a miracle. The black woman she had dismissed as incompetent was moving with fiery, world-class talent that made every other person in the room look clumsy and dull. The guests were no longer watching with pity or amusement. They were watching with their jaws agape, their champagne glasses forgotten in their hands. They were captivated, enthralled, witnessing something real and raw in a day that had been scripted to perfection. Beatrice's face, a mask of carefully constructed superiority, began to crumble. This was her moment, her son, her dance. And it had been stolen by the girl she had tried to crush. She watched as Liam lifted Alara into a breathtaking, spinning lift, her body a perfect, elegant line against the lights of the tent. Beatrice didn't see a dance. She saw a rebellion. She saw her authority, her judgment, her entire worldview being dismantled, step by glorious step, in front of everyone she had sought to impress. The humiliation Alara had felt earlier was a pale shadow compared to the tidal wave of incandescent shame that now washed over Beatrice Sterling. She had not only been cruel, she had been a fool, a blind, arrogant fool. The final, dramatic chord of the tango hung in the air. Liam dipped Alara low, her back arched, one hand touching the floor, her eyes blazing with triumph. For a long, breathless moment, there was absolute silence. Then, a single person began to clap, then another, and within seconds, the entire tent erupted in a thunderous, spontaneous ovation. It was louder and more genuine than any of the polite applause that had followed the vows or the toasts. It was a roar of appreciation for something undeniably true. Liam helped Alara to her feet. She was breathing heavily, her face flushed, her eyes shining with unshed tears, not of shame, but a pure, unadulterated joy. She had forgotten this feeling, the feeling of being seen, truly seen. Liam kept his arm around her, turning to face the cheering crowd. He raised his free hand for silence. "For those of you who don't know," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound strength and clarity, "this is Alara Vance." He looked directly at his mother, who stood frozen at the edge of the dance floor, her face a pale, horrified mask. "When we were kids, we took dance classes together, but I was never in her league. Alara was the most gifted dancer I have ever known. She was offered a full scholarship to Juilliard." A fresh wave of murmurs and gasps swept through the guests. They looked at Alara with new eyes, seeing not the help, but the prodigy. "She gave it all up to come home and take care of her mother when she got sick," Liam continued, his voice thick with emotion. "She put her dreams on hold for her family. She is a woman of more grace, talent, and integrity than anyone I know." He paused, and his final words were delivered with a quiet, devastating finality, his gaze still locked on Beatrice. "And she is one of my oldest and dearest friends." The statement was a verdict. Beatrice Sterling had not just insulted a florist. She had insulted her son's honored friend. She had mocked a brilliant artist. She had revealed her own character to be shallow and ugly in a room full of people whose opinions she valued above all else. There was nowhere for her to hide. Her perfect party was in ruins, shattered not by a splash of water, but by the weight of her own prejudice. Before the night was over, a well-known arts patron had approached Alara with his card, offering to fund a new start for her, to connect her with a contemporary dance company in the city. The wedding photographer, who had captured the entire dance, knew he had shots that would win him awards. The bride, Chloe, came to Alara and gave her a hug, whispering, "Thank you. I've never seen him stand up to her like that. You just gave our marriage the best wedding gift possible." Alara didn't gloat. She didn't look at Beatrice with malice. She simply accepted the apologies and the accolades with the same quiet dignity with which she had accepted the humiliation. Her victory wasn't in Beatrice's defeat. It was in her own reclamation. She left the Sterling estate that night not as a fired florist, but as an artist reborn. The scent of roses no longer a reminder of her shame, but a fragrance of new beginnings. The ghost had found her voice, not in words, but in the powerful, undeniable poetry of her own 2 feet. Some are born into a world of privilege, believing their worth is measured by the name they carry or the money they possess. They build walls of judgment to protect their fragile thrones, mistaking status for substance and arrogance for strength. But true worth is not inherited. It is forged. It is forged in the silent hours of practice, in the sacrifices made for love, in the quiet resilience of a spirit that refuses to be extinguished. It is a fire that can be banked, hidden, and ignored, but it can never truly be put out. And when it is finally given the oxygen to burn, it illuminates the truth, exposing the hollow crowns and paper thrones of those who live in the dark, and reminding us all that the most powerful dance is the one that reclaims the soul. If you believe that character is more powerful than class, and that true grace always triumphs over prejudice, subscribe for more stories that reveal the hidden strength within the underestimated.